The courtroom was packed. Reporters scribbled notes, lawyers exchanged whispered strategies, and the judge adjusted his glasses, preparing for what promised to be an intense trial. At the center of it all sat a boy, 12-year-old David Carter, his small figure dwarfed by the towering witness stand. His wide eyes scanned the room, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched the edge of his chair. David's mother, Emily, sat at the defendant's table, her face pale but composed. She was accused of embezzling from the tech company where she worked, a scandal that had rocked their small New York suburb. The prosecution, led by a shrewd and aggressive attorney named Martin Graves, had built a seemingly airtight case. "Your Honor," Graves began, his voice sharp as a blade, "we have undeniable evidence that the defendant siphoned funds from her employer over a period of 6 months. Bank transfers, forged signatures. It's all here." He gestured to a stack of documents on his table. The facts speak for themselves. Emily's lawyer, a kind but less experienced attorney named Lisa Harper, struggled to keep up with the onslaught. Despite her best efforts, the tide seemed to be against them. But David knew something no one else did. He had seen things, heard conversations that didn't add up. He wasn't supposed to be involved, but as the trial wore on, his determination to speak the truth grew stronger. Finally, as the prosecution wrapped up their damning evidence, David couldn't take it anymore. He shot up from his seat. "Your Honor," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "they are lying." The courtroom froze. "Sit down," the judge barked. "This is highly irregular." But David stood his ground. His next words would change everything. "Please, I need to tell you something." David's heart pounded in his chest as the judge stared him down. "Young man," the judge said firmly, "this is not the time or place. Sit down, or I'll have no choice but to remove you from the courtroom." David glanced at his mother, who was shaking her head, silently pleading with him to stay quiet. But he couldn't. The truth burned inside him like a fire. "I know something," David said, his voice stronger now. "Something that proves my mom didn't do this." The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking. Even Martin Graves looked momentarily taken aback. The judge sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Approach the bench," he said, gesturing to David. As David walked to the bench, the room seemed to hold its collective breath. He leaned in close, his voice barely a whisper. "Your Honor, I overheard Mr. Graves talking to someone. He said he didn't care if the evidence was fake as long as he won the case." The judge's eyes widened. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Is this true?" he asked, his voice low. David nodded. "I heard him in the hallway. He was talking to a man in a suit. They didn't see me, but I heard everything." The judge looked at David for a long moment, then turned to the courtroom. "This matter requires immediate attention. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning." As the gavel slammed down, David felt a mix of relief and fear. He had spoken the truth, but what would happen next? The courtroom emptied in a flurry of hushed conversations and curious glances. Emily grabbed David's hand as soon as they were out of the courtroom. "David," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why would you say that? What if they think you're lying?" "I'm not lying, Mom," David said firmly. "I heard him. He was talking about the case like it was some kind of game. I couldn't just sit there and let them blame you for something you didn't do." Emily knelt in front of him, her eyes searching his. "I'm proud of you for standing up for what you believe, but you've just made a powerful enemy. That man won't let this slide." David nodded, understanding the weight of what he'd done. His mother was right. Martin Graves was not the kind of person to back down, especially after being publicly accused. As they walked out of the courthouse, a reporter with a microphone rushed toward them. David, what did you tell the judge? Do you have evidence to support your claim?" Before David could respond, Lisa Harper stepped in. "No comment," she said firmly, shielding David and Emily as they made their way to the car. Inside the car, Lisa turned to Emily. "This could be a game changer," she said, "but it's also risky. We need to prepare for a fight." David's testimony puts a target on him, and you. Graves isn't just going to let this go. Emily's face hardened with determination. Let him come. We'll prove the truth. David looked out the window, his heart racing. He had started something big, something that couldn't be undone. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the moment in the courtroom, wondering if he had done the right thing. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of voices coming from the living room. He crept down the stairs and saw his mother talking to Lisa. They were whispering, but their faces were tense. "We need to act fast," Lisa said. "If Graves really tampered with evidence, we need to find proof before he covers his tracks." Emily nodded. "But how? He's got resources we can't compete with." David cleared his throat, stepping into the room. "What if I help? I know what I heard, and I can figure out who he was talking to." Emily shook her head. "Absolutely not. This is too dangerous." Lisa hesitated. "Actually, David might be our best chance. He's a kid. No one would suspect him of snooping. But only if he's willing and careful." David's eyes lit up. "I'll do whatever it takes." The plan was risky, but they didn't have many options. The next day, David would try to uncover the truth and step into a world of danger he never expected. The next morning, David slipped on his school backpack and tucked a small notebook inside. Lisa had given him a quick lesson on how to take discreet notes and what to listen for. "Remember," she had said, "you're just a kid. No one will suspect you, but don't take any unnecessary risks." Emily was nervous as she dropped David off at school. "Be careful, sweetheart," she said. David nodded, giving her a reassuring smile before heading inside. But David wasn't planning to stay at school. As soon as the coast was clear, he slipped out through the back gate and made his way to the courthouse. He had overheard Lisa mention that Graves often worked out of a nearby office when he wasn't in court. If Graves was hiding something, that was where he'd find it. David's heart pounded as he entered the building, blending in with the steady flow of people. He spotted Graves in the lobby, talking on his phone. David stayed at a safe distance, pretending to look at a vending machine while straining to hear. "We just need to make sure nothing points back to us," Graves was saying. "I'll handle it. Just keep your mouth shut and follow orders." David scribbled the words in his notebook, his hands shaking. Graves hung up and headed for the elevator. David hesitated, then decided to follow. He waited until the elevator doors closed before taking the stairs, climbing quickly to the third floor. He found Graves in an office, talking to a tall man in a dark suit. David crouched behind a nearby filing cabinet, holding his breath. "We've destroyed the originals," the man said. "There's no way they can trace it back." David's eyes widened. Originals? Were they talking about the evidence against his mother? "Good," Graves said. "But we need to stay ahead. If that kid opens his mouth again, we're in trouble." David's pulse raced. He had to get out of there. Quietly, he slipped back down the stairs and out of the building. He had what he needed, but he also knew he was in over his head. David sprinted home, his mind racing. He burst through the door, startling Emily and Lisa, who were sitting in the living room. "What happened?" Emily asked, her voice panicked. David handed Lisa the notebook. "I followed Graves. He was talking about destroying evidence." Lisa's eyes scanned the page, her expression growing serious. "This is big. If we can prove they tampered with evidence, it could blow the case wide open." "But how do we prove it?" Emily asked. "They said they destroyed the originals." Lisa thought for a moment. If they destroyed the originals, there must have been copies. Graves isn't the type to leave loose ends. We just need to figure out where he's keeping them. David frowned. "What if they're on his computer?" Lisa nodded. "It's possible, but hacking into his system is risky and illegal." Emily bit her lip. "We don't have time to play it safe. If they win this case, it'll ruin my life and David's. We have to take the risk." Lisa sighed. "All right, I'll figure out a way to access his computer. But we need to be smart about this." As they planned their next move, David felt a mixture of fear and excitement. They were close to uncovering the truth, but the stakes had never been higher. The room was tense as Lisa laid out the plan. We don't need to hack into Graves' system directly. We just need to gain access to his office and see what's on his computer. If he's sloppy enough to leave traces of the originals or communications about them, that's our proof. Emily looked skeptical. And how exactly are we supposed to get into his office? It's not like he'll hand over the keys. Lisa smirked. We won't need keys. The courthouse has a cleaning crew that works in the evenings. We'll pose as part of the team. I can get us uniforms and clearance. David raised his hand, as if he were back in school. And what do I do? Lisa hesitated. You've done enough, David. It's too dangerous. No, David protested. I know what I heard, and I'm the reason we're doing this. I'm not staying behind. Emily sighed. I don't like it, but he's right. He knows more about what Graves said than either of us. Lisa nodded reluctantly. Fine, but, David, you'll stay out of sight and let us handle anything that goes wrong. Agreed. David nodded eagerly. Agreed. The next evening, dressed in janitor uniforms, the three of them entered the courthouse. Lisa had managed to get access cards from a friend who worked in building maintenance. Stick to the plan, Lisa whispered as they stepped into the elevator. David, you keep watch in the hallway. Emily, you help me look for anything on Graves' computer. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open. They stepped into the dimly lit office floor, where the cleaning crew was just wrapping up for the night. Lisa led them to Graves' office. It was locked as expected, but she quickly picked the lock with tools she had brought. David stayed in the hallway, his ears straining for any sound. Inside the office, Emily and Lisa powered up Graves' computer. Password protected, Lisa muttered, pulling out a small USB drive. But not for long. David's heart pounded as he spotted a shadow moving down the hallway. Someone was coming. He knocked softly on the door to warn them. Inside, Lisa worked quickly, bypassing the password. We're in, she whispered, pulling up a folder labeled case files. Outside, David saw the figure approaching. It was a security guard, flashlight in hand. He froze, holding his breath. The guard's footsteps echoed as he approached. David thought quickly, stepping into view. Hey, kid, the guard said, frowning. What are you doing here? David held up a mop. I'm with the cleaning crew, he said, forcing a casual tone. They told me to start on this floor. The guard raised an eyebrow. This late? You're supposed to be out of here by now. Sorry, David said, scratching the back of his neck. I'm new. I got lost. The guard sighed. All right, just finish up quick. You're not supposed to be here after hours. David nodded, relief flooding through him as the guard turned and walked away. He knocked on the office door again. Lisa cracked it open. Guard's gone, but we need to hurry, David whispered. Inside, Lisa and Emily were frantically copying files onto a USB drive. Got it, Lisa said, pulling out the drive and shutting down the computer. They quickly tidied the desk, erasing any signs of their presence. The three of them slipped out of the building and into the night, hearts pounding. They had the files, but would it be enough? Back at home, Lisa plugged the USB drive into her laptop. David and Emily hovered behind her, watching as files popped up on the screen. Lisa clicked on a folder labeled Evidence Disposal. Inside, they found scanned documents, emails, and even a recorded voice memo from Graves himself. This is gold, Lisa whispered. She opened one of the emails, which was addressed to the man David had seen in Graves' office. The email detailed how the original financial records had been falsified to implicate Emily and included instructions to destroy all backups. This proves they framed you, Mom, David said, his voice trembling with both relief and anger. Lisa nodded. But we need more. A jury will want concrete proof that these documents are real and not fabricated by us. Graves is cunning. He'll argue these files are fake unless we can tie him directly to the tampering. Emily frowned. How do we do that? Lisa tapped the screen. This voice memo. If Graves recorded himself talking about the case, it could be our smoking gun. She clicked on the audio file. Graves' voice filled the room. The originals are gone. Even if they dig, they'll never find them. Emily Carter will take the fall, and will walk away clean. David clenched his fists. He doesn't even care about ruining lives. Lisa's face was grim. This changes everything. But we need to make sure this evidence is admissible in court. The next morning, Lisa submitted the USB drive to a digital forensic expert to verify its authenticity. "We need this to hold up in court," she told him. "Can you confirm the metadata and trace it back to Martin Graves?" The expert, a middle-aged man named Tony, nodded. "I'll get started right away." Meanwhile, Lisa filed an emergency motion to introduce the new evidence. The judge agreed to hear the motion but warned her, "You'd better be prepared to defend its credibility." Back at the courthouse, David and Emily sat nervously as the hearing began. Graves looked as confident as ever, but when Lisa presented the audio recording, his smug expression faltered. "Your Honor, this recording was obtained illegally," Graves argued. "It cannot be admitted as evidence." Lisa stood her ground. "Your Honor, the recording was on Mr. Graves' computer, which contains multiple files showing he falsified evidence. The truth cannot be silenced because of how it was discovered." The judge looked sternly at both sides. "I'll allow the evidence for now, but its admissibility will depend on the forensic expert's report." Graves glared at Lisa. David noticed the way his hands clenched into fists, and a chill ran down his spine. Graves wasn't just angry, he was desperate. Part 12, Graves Strikes Back. That evening, as David and his family returned home, they found their front door slightly ajar. Emily's face paled. "Stay behind me," she whispered, stepping inside cautiously. The house was a mess. Papers were strewn across the floor, drawers pulled open, and furniture overturned. "They're trying to scare us," Lisa said, scanning the room. "Or they're looking for something." David's eyes fell on the USB drive, still plugged into Lisa's laptop. "They didn't get it," he said, relief flooding through him. Emily hugged him tightly. "We can't stay here. It's not safe." Lisa agreed. "Pack a bag. I'll take you to a safe place tonight." As they gathered their things, David noticed a crumpled piece of paper on the floor. It was a note scrawled in thick, angry letters. "Drop this or else." David's resolve hardened. "They think they can scare us into stopping," he said. "But they're wrong." The next day, the forensic expert, Tony, delivered his findings. "The files are genuine," he said. "The metadata shows they were created on Graves' computer, and the emails were sent from his official account." Lisa presented the report in court. The judge reviewed it carefully before turning to Graves. "Mr. Graves, do you have any explanation for this?" Graves' lawyer stood up, stammering. "Your Honor, this is a misunderstanding. These files were planted by the defense to discredit my client." Lisa didn't miss a beat. "The forensic evidence speaks for itself, Your Honor. The truth is finally coming to light." The judge nodded. "The evidence will be admitted. This case is taking a new direction." David felt a surge of hope. For the first time, it seemed like justice was within reach. Graves was visibly unraveling. Over the next few days, Lisa called witnesses who testified to Graves' shady dealings. A former colleague admitted that Graves had offered him a bribe to remain silent. David watched as Graves' confidence crumbled. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now cornered. Finally, Lisa delivered her closing argument. "This case is about more than just Emily Carter. It's about the integrity of our justice system. Martin Graves thought he could manipulate the law for his own gain. But thanks to the courage of a young boy and the power of truth, justice will prevail." The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back into their seats after deliberating for hours. David sat between Emily and Lisa, clutching his mother's hand tightly. The weight of the trial hung heavy in the air. Reporters were poised, cameras ready to capture the moment that would determine the fate of Emily and the integrity of the justice system. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" the judge asked, his voice steady. The jury foreman stood. "We have, Your Honor." David's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the foreman unfold a piece of paper. Time seemed to slow as the man began to speak. In the case of the People versus Emily Carter, we find the defendant. He paused, glancing at Emily. Not guilty. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a wave of murmured reactions. Emily clapped a hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. David hugged her tightly, relief washing over him. For the first time in weeks, it felt like he could breathe. The judge raised his gavel. Order in the courtroom. Once silence was restored, he continued. Emily Carter, you are acquitted of all charges. This court finds sufficient evidence of misconduct on the part of the prosecution. An investigation into these allegations will begin immediately. The gavel came down, and the courtroom erupted in chaos. Reporters swarmed, shouting questions, but Lisa ushered David and Emily out of the room before they could get caught in the fray. Outside the courthouse, the trio found a moment of peace. Emily hugged David tightly, her voice trembling. You saved me, David. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to, David replied. I just wanted to make sure everyone knew the truth. Lisa smiled, placing a hand on David's shoulder. You're braver than most adults I've met. Don't ever lose that. But the fight wasn't over. The judge's announcement of an investigation into Graves sent shockwaves through the legal community. Within days, a special prosecutor was assigned to examine the case, uncovering a web of corruption that went far beyond Emily's trial. Graves was arrested on charges of evidence tampering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The man who once held so much power was now fighting for his freedom. David became an unlikely hero in the media. News outlets praised his courage, calling him the boy who stood for truth. Interviews flooded in, but David declined most of them. He didn't want fame, he just wanted life to go back to normal. One day, as he walked home from school, a stranger approached him. It was one of the jurors from the trial. I just wanted to thank you, the man said. Your bravery reminded us all why we do this. Why justice matters. David nodded, feeling a warmth he couldn't quite describe. For the first time, he understood the impact of what he'd done. Part 18, moving forward. With the trial behind them, Emily and David began to rebuild their lives. Emily was offered a new job at a local nonprofit, where she could use her skills to help others. David returned to school, but he carried the lessons he'd learned with him. Lisa stayed in touch, visiting often and reminding David that he had a bright future ahead. You've got a gift for standing up for what's right, she said. Don't ever lose that. Part 19, the ripple effect. The fallout from Graves' corruption scandal was far-reaching. Several other cases he had prosecuted were reopened, leading to exonerations for innocent people who had been wrongfully convicted. The justice system, shaken by the revelations, began implementing reforms to prevent future abuses of power. David watched these changes with a sense of pride. He had been a small part of something much bigger, something that would make the world a little fairer for everyone. Part 20, a legacy of courage. Years later, David stood on a stage, addressing a crowd at a youth leadership conference. He was now a young man, poised and confident, but his message remained the same. Standing up for the truth isn't always easy, he said. Sometimes it's scary. Sometimes it feels impossible. But if you have the courage to speak up, you can make a difference. Not just for yourself, but for others too. The audience erupted in applause, but David's thoughts were elsewhere. He looked out at the faces before him, remembering the little boy who had once stood in a courtroom and declared, "Your Honor, they are lying." That moment had changed everything, and it had proven that sometimes, even the smallest voices could create the loudest echoes.